I'd like to welcome everyone to the National Disability Employment, goodness, NDEAM from WeCo. And we are going to be getting started now. Let's see here. Got it. Sorry. Why is this not going? All right, technical difficulties. There we go. So the agenda for today is I'm going to go through the housekeeping. We'll have introductions of our panel. There will be a discussion, and then we'll have Q&A and a wrap up. So all guests will please keep themselves on mute until the Q&A portion of our session today. If you've got questions, you can type them into the chat box for inclusion in the Q&A, or else you can please announce yourself before asking your question. Captions are provided by Caption Access, and a recording will be available on our YouTube channel after the closed captioning has been processed. And now I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, the WeCo Accessibility Services founder and president, Lynn Wehrman. Lynn?
Thanks, Debbie, and welcome everybody. Happy National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And our theme this year is America's Recovery, fueled by inclusion, I think it is, something like that. But I like that theme because we realize that there are a good many of us that live with disabilities that have still been relegated to the sidelines regarding employment. It's estimated that about 80% of people living with disabilities are still unemployed or underemployed. We also know that we're really going through a shortage of workers, not just due to COVID, but due to an aging baby boom population where the subsequent generations aren't quite enough to fill the roles that are available. So we're hoping that if you are here today or watching this recording, that you can understand that disability inclusion is more than just the right thing to do. It's an excellent business decision on a number of levels. And I think that our panelists are going to bring that to life for you today. So allow me to introduce who we have with us today. We're really excited to have Matthew Luken. He is the UX Design Director and Vice President of Digital Accessibility for US Bank. Matthew has also recently been featured in Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal for his team's work in making US Bank's digital tools more accessible to clients with disabilities. I met Matthew a few years ago through a colleague and have always marveled at his ability to and desire to include real subject matter experts who live with disabilities on his team. He's always recognized that people living with disabilities are the best experts in their own experience. So welcome, Matthew. And also with us today is Fred Moltz. Fred is the Chief Accessibility Officer for Verizon, and he's been working for Verizon in different capacities for the last 21 years. Fred also works with one of WeCo's top testers, who is now our diversity and inclusion consultant, Paul Day. And Paul just speaks so highly of Fred's ability and desire to allow him to challenge. Someone needs to, there we go. I'm echoing back into somebody's speakers. But Paul also always speaks about Fred's willingness to allow him and the other subject matter experts working on the team to challenge the limits at Verizon to get people to see things differently. So we're really excited to hear from Fred. And finally, we have Kelli Ryan. Kelli is our Director of Operations and Human Resources here at WeCo. Her work on WeCo's disability accommodation has been honored as groundbreaking with our company's Inspired Innovation Award in 2020. And I guess that what I could say to that is that her approach to integrate accommodation as just standard business practice, normal thing that we do from candidate outreach down to changing roles when necessary for staff members, has really allowed us to retain and reassign talent individuals living with disabilities. So with that, I think we'll get going. We're just going to reiterate our housekeeping rules. Please mute yourself when you enter. If you don't, Debbie will mute you. And there will be a time at the end to ask questions of the panelists. And so at that time, you will be unmuted. So thank you if you're just joining us. We just introduced our panel, and we are going to lead into questions. I've got a standard group of questions, and at the end, I've got some lightning round questions that we're going to get feedback from everyone. The initial questions I will direct at certain members of the panel. We'll skip around. I know Kelly doesn't like it when I skip around, but we may, depending upon where the conversation takes us. So I think I'd like to start with Matthew with our first question. What does disability employment look like for your team and or organization?
I'd like to say it doesn't look any different than anything else, right? I try not to think about it any differently. We try to staff the best talent we possibly can get, source, afford to bring onto the team. And finding gems where we find people that have a disability that can come join our team and bring that value to our team is really the extra icing on the cake for me, right? So I don't necessarily go and recruit somebody specifically for a disability, but rather once they're on board, leverage whatever disability they're able to disclose to me or are willing to disclose to me and trying to maximize what they can bring to the team. So it looks very much like hiring any person.
So can you explain more, Matthew, about how you leverage disability as an asset?
So much like WeCo, we have different capabilities within our team. We are involved through the entire life cycle of the digital product. So from design into development, into testing, conformance or audit in post-production, right? So depending on individual roles, I might be using someone to go and do manual accessibility testing with assistive technology and other tools in one position. In another position, I might have a consultant working with a designer to try to eliminate as much of the potential defects that we can see in the design as possible based on the WCAG guidelines. So anywhere from design, testing, development, input recommendation, audit recommendation, remediation.
Okay, great, thank you. Fred, would you like to comment on what disability employment looks for your team and organization?
Absolutely. I think just like Matthew, I pretty much have the same answer. It looks just like everything else at Verizon for myself. Like you said, I've been at Verizon for 21 years. I've been managing roughly 20, if not more, of the 21 years. So I've always, I'm always looking for the best candidate, right? Doesn't matter what your ability is, as long as you are the best candidate for the role I'm looking for. Now you fast forward to where I am today. The last 6+ years, I created and been running our accessibility program, and I'm very fortunate to be part of this team and to be able to do this, and that we have the commitment from Verizon to actually have this team. So just like Matthew, we get involved at the beginning of a project, right, or initiative. And that's whether it's from a customer-facing initiative or an employee-facing initiative. And so doesn't matter who you are on my team, we're going to go through that life cycle the same. We're going to review designs, do annotations, work back with development, make sure the WCAG guidelines are adhered to. But where I think we have a great opportunity is I do have some people on my team who have disclosed about their disabilities, whether it's hearing, whether it's a visual impairment. And so as we are going through the design phase and the testing phase, if one of those individuals aren't on that project, depending on where we're at in that project or the type of project, I may actually tap on the shoulder and say, hey, I would love your perspective. This is either the prototype, this is the flow, you know, from your perspective. Let's not even worry about WCAG, just the experience. How do you feel about this? What can we be doing better? What's actually working well? And, you know, it's really great to have those insights because I don't have a disability. Members of my team do. So I'm relying on them for their insights because just like everybody else, we can try as hard as we can to follow the WCAG guidelines for digital properties, but that only goes so far. The experience is what counts. So.
Great, thank you. Kelli, I think we've got a little reverb going back on my voice there. Okay, all right. Kelli, at WeCo, we approach disability pretty much head on because we see it as a skill set. And for us, we look for people with certain disabilities as a state of Minnesota statute legal bona fide requirement for the role. So for instance, we have some individuals, we know that we need to hire someone who is blind to do a specific testing role. We need to find somebody who's blind. So could you tell us more on how that works through the process?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, like Lynn was just explaining, we are actively seeking out individuals living with disabilities for our test team, but we also, on our staff teams, we're made up about 90% of our staff team is living with a disability. And that can be in entry-level roles, that can be in mid-management, and in a director role. So we are filling these roles not only for being able to use their disability as a skill set in accessibility testing, but also to use their disability as a skill set within our staff. We also, because most of our staff are living with a disability, we have to remember that disability employment isn't just about hiring. It's also for people that are already embedded within our teams. Approximately 30% of people aged 35 to 65 are going to suffer a disability for at least 90 days. And about 1 in 7 can expect to become disabled for 5 years or more. So disability employment really needs to encompass every step, every stop in that life cycle within the organization. And so we are constantly evolving. We are constantly educating ourselves on laws, on practices, figuring out what works for our staff and what doesn't. You know, disability needs can change. And the way that we focus our energy on that is we ask our staff questions. What is it that you need? What is it that we could be doing better? And we're just constantly learning, doing the best we can to keep up with ever-changing needs and a giant talent pool.
Great. Okay. I'm wondering, I'm going to start out with Fred on this one. Does Verizon consider disability as part of diversity in your organization?
Yes, we do. We are, you'll hear Verizon speak a lot about we're committed to moving the world forward. We recently, last year, joined the Valuable 500 to really kind of show our support for disability inclusion. And it's something that's been part of Verizon. Listen, I've been there for 21 years. I feel like it's always been part of our culture. Whether it's from the interview process, the application process, once we onboard individual does have a disability, if there's accommodations are needed, reviewing those accommodations, providing accommodations. But it goes even further than that. I think that's where you can really see the commitment that we have is all of our recruiters have required training on disability, ADA requirements, so on and so forth. So that's a big piece of it. And then as we continue, I think, as Kelly stated, right, we're always evolving. So how can we still do better? So we have a very talented team at Verizon that, disability inclusion that's their job, and they're always focused on it, number one. Number two, I think a testament of Verizon is we, for 6 years in a row, received the perfect score for DEI, which, for me, being in this role isn't hard to believe, just knowing the work I do with our HR team on a daily basis. But I think the other great piece is that we have an ERG team, an ERG group called Advance, and they are very vocal. And they're always providing lots of feedback, insights of how we can do better, and we take those and we listen, and where it makes sense to put it in, we do. There may be things that's just more of education and awareness, but I think disability inclusion is at the core of who Verizon is, and it's one of the reasons why I've really enjoyed working here.
Great. Well, to translate for everyone, DEI is Disability Employment Indexed. And I may not be up on this, but is Verizon a disability in DEI, or you are? Great.
Yes.
Okay, and WeCo is too. WeCo is one of the few small businesses that, or actually that's a leading disability employer. We're one of the few small businesses, but we're Adobe, which is a disability owned business that interfaces with that DEI. So Matthew, your organization just earned the disability and DEI designation as a disability employment company. Tell me about how disability fits into your diversity efforts at US Bank.
So it's tied to our core values. It's tied to our strategy, right? We want to, provide financial services for everyone. And we see the direct correlation into our DEI, into our hiring efforts, into everything from the annual report out to our digital products, right? So ensuring that when we have people with disabilities employed, that we can accommodate their needs. And so from all aspects, right down to ensuring that we're talking about it, right? Not just providing, say, lip service in air quotes, but rather, walk the walk as well.
And this is really a sea change. When I started this company 10 years ago, no one thought of disability employment as a part of a diversity effort. It was very much separated. I was in an employee resource group for my employer, which was the Minnesota Department of Transportation. And it was really difficult for us to make any headway in that regard. So it's wonderful to see companies recognizing that now. So
and thanks to the DIN for their CEO challenge, right?
Yeah.
That activity is really starting to drive the change at that level, as you say. Challenging the CEOs to take those next steps is what's helping us drive it internally as well.
Great. Well, it doesn't sound like disability employment is extremely new for any organization here, but I have to ask, Matthew, since we've got your ear, what kind of initial roadblocks would you say that US Bank faced, and how were they addressed?
Well, I think we're no different than many other companies, right? Where you see that we have technology that's older, for example. At the time, digital accessibility wasn't thought about, say, 10 years ago in the way it is today. The WCAG was just starting to take traction and come out with iteration 1. So as we start thinking about employees using systems, that's really the key, right? What do they need to do in their job, and do we have the systems that can meet it? And that really is the biggest hurdle, right? Is getting people to understand what positions we can fill and what capabilities are available with the technology. What is the roadmap for technology? And how do we plan to change that technology over time? Right? We want people to come in and be successful. We want them to be able to do their job. They want to feel reward in their position, right? That they're providing value to the company. But we need to be able to get them to work as well. And so that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, is the technology that's older. And it's not just, our company or other companies. We also see everything in our daily lives is also a struggle as we see technology advance. Even in hospital, there was taking my brother to the hospital yesterday, right? And we see there's a dichotomy between newer technology sitting right side by side older technology, and the differences are dramatic. Or sitting next to somebody with an older cell phone, right? We start to see leaps, and that's really when we think about the technological challenge. Is the leap is great, but at the same time the leap can be problematic, right? Because if the older technology is not moving forward, then the gap becomes bigger and bigger.
And I think that's a really good point, because in my work, when I was working with an advisory committee on MnDOT's Americans with Disabilities Act transition plan, one of the biggest challenges that we faced is that people that were on that committee advising us could not afford the latest technology. And whereas the technology can be great, that not everybody can afford that technology. And so sometimes
it has to be in reach.
Yes, and in your business and also Fred's business, I'm sure that's very common, is that how to deal with people, that need to continue to use this technology at least for a while until we get from there.
And even in the city, right? So you and I are both from the city of Minneapolis. Minneapolis won Super Bowl, and there was a huge initiative to ensure that everything was accessible. That was part of the Super Bowl initiatives, and we see curb cuts and more advanced wait at stoplights, with announcements for blind users. But now that we have that in the central core around the stadium, what about the rest of the city? Right? Minneapolis is a very sprawling city, and we don't want people with disabilities to have to live in a specific location just because the capabilities are there, right? They should be able to live anywhere they want within the city and have the same expectations of curb cuts and the latest technology at the streetlights. That's the biggest challenge I think anybody has, government or private institution, is once you start moving in that direction, you got to keep moving, right? You have to keep funding it and build it into that muscle memory and build it into the funding going forward, not as a line item that can be cut out,
Right.
But rather it stays in there.
And becomes a way of doing business. And maybe Kelli, you could jump in on that and talk about how we've overcome some roadblocks as a small company to accessibility. And to us, it's an imperative. It's not optional. We figure it out, right?
Right. Some of the roadblocks to accessibility, as we are hiring and bringing people on, we are immediately having conversations about accommodations. We are immediately training our staff on how to write accessible documents. I had to learn, coming in about being able to find candidates, making sure that our job descriptions are accessible, making sure that the way that we do interviews are accessible. We put in a little bit of extra work to find some of our candidates. We work with mentors to enhance the outreach program, even though our focus and our mission is employing individuals living with disabilities. There are still things that we could learn and get better at, and that's something that we've been focusing on over the years. One roadblock that I know that some people have is a lack of work experience. And so as we are looking at candidates and looking at bringing people into our team, we have to be able to find different things to look at. Volunteer experience. Some people held different positions in college, making sure that we are looking at that whole picture when we're doing consideration for candidates, we really look a lot towards aptitude, willingness to do the work. And a lot of times when people are interviewing with us, if there is an accommodation that they need, the hope is that we have accommodation verbiage in our job applications. We have verbiage in our job postings. We talk about, do you need an accommodation when we're scheduling the interview? And the hope is that as we are discussing these essential job duties in our outreach, that they are knowing that we are willing to work with accommodations. A lot of time people have their own accommodation already. And it's as simple as, hey, I'm going to need a screen reader. I have one. Can I use my own computer? Yes, great. So what may seem like roadblocks are usually things that can be overcome by just having those conversations and just making sure that we're letting people know, hey, we're inclusive. We love accommodations. Bring it on. So,
absolutely. Fred, how about in your organization? What kind of roadblocks were there to disability employment?
So, I don't really have a great answer for that. And let me explain to you why. Once I started running the accessibility program, accommodations was already part of what Verizon was doing, and it's been that for a while. And I can easily say that because there's actually an individual who's on my team today that I remember seeing her 15 years ago. She was an IT professional doing coding. She was always one of the first people in the building, and I was probably the second person in the building every morning. And she had her guide dog with her, and she would sit there, and I was amazed because it's the first time I actually saw this in my life where there was no monitor. She was just typing away coding.
Coding
and so,
by ear.
Yeah. So when think 15 years ago, you kind of getting to the office, it's like 6:45 in the morning. You haven't had that second cup of coffee yet, and you're walking by, and you're like, oh, there's a dog. Oh, there's a monitor, and just one of the happiest people in the world. Now, I remember having conversations with her saying, like, wow, I'm like, so we've done all this for you and we have this available for you. And she's like, yes, the company is great. They've made these accommodations. They make sure I have the tools I need. So I'm going based on personal experience with talking with her from 15 years ago. Now you fast forward to where I am today, and she's part of my team. And it's great. So I know it's always been part of our core values, but like I said, I can at least trace back 15 years ago, and I know it was in practice. Now, just like every company, to what Matthew was talking about and Kelly, technology changes. So you have to be ahead of the curve, right? And we have to learn more. And I really feel that we are positioned that way. And I mentioned this earlier, one of the things Verizon has done to kind of elevate that is we did join the Valuable 500. And that's, 500 companies worldwide who really are looking for disability inclusion and innovation. And I think our CEO said the best. We want to be part of this organization, not just to help and teach people, but we want to learn from these other companies as well. Because not any one company is ever going to do it 100% right? And I think that's really important for people to understand. People make mistakes. People are going to learn new techniques or new technology. And it really kind of goes into the overall culture of Verizon. And I'm gonna kind of plug this here right now because I think it's really important for this conversation. Verizon, we do a lot of societal programs. One of them is called Teach Access. And the purpose behind Teach Access is really kind to bridge the gap in accessibility skill sets out there, and leveraging on our 5G technology, and really having that inclusion. So something I'm proud of that the company does, but it's really a valuable tool, and anybody can actually go out to our website and learn more about Teach Access, because it's a great program to really bring skill sets together for people who do have disabilities, and more importantly for people who don't have disabilities, so they learn more. So it's really great. So I can say from an accommodations perspective, I feel like we've been in the forefront. I do feel that we have upped our game but there's always room for improvement. I will never give us, anybody a pat on the back saying you're doing 100%, because there's always something more you can do. And I think as long as you are part of an organization that wants to do more, I think that goes a long way too.
Great, thank you. I think we're going to shift the conversation a little bit into the how. How does your accommodation process work? And if you don't mind, I'm going to start out with Kelli, because Kelli has this down. So at WeCo, how does this accommodation process work, maybe for new hires and maybe for people that are existing on the team?
Sure. So I mentioned before, we went through all of our job postings and added information about accommodations. So here's our essential job duties. We will work with you if you need accommodation. We ask about, will you need an accommodation to participate in our interviews? And we have several different ways of being able to do interviews for people. So if someone comes back and says, hey, I do need to do this differently, we say, perfect, see you on Tuesday at 2 p.m. So we're having a lot of accommodations being out there already. We talk about our accommodation process in orientation. They are sent our process document with all of our links that we have on, here's what our process looks like, here's what you can expect, here's the link for you to request an accommodation the first day that you start. We train on our accommodation process annually, the same way that we would train on anti-harassment, the same way we train on ethics, really reminding people, hey, disabilities can change, needs can change. Before your performance starts to change, let's really start talking about an accommodation here. What can we do for you? Because we want you to bring your whole self to work. We wouldn't have hired these individuals if we didn't think that they were the best people for that job. And so we want to keep them in those roles happy and healthy. We talk about part of our accommodation process then is to annually review accommodation. So we check in to make sure that the accommodation that they are using, that we are providing, is still working and is still effective. And if it's not effective, let's talk about what we need to change, what we can do. So it's just an ongoing conversation from before they've even joined our team, all the way to annual training and annual check-ins.
I think that one thing that many companies and individuals don't realize when they start to consider and embark upon disability employment is that very, very few disabilities are static. They change over time. So Kelli, I know you can speak a little bit to how that works in our team when somebody's disability changes.
Yes, if someone's disability is changing, without going into too much detail, that there's a couple current accommodations that are being changed. We are moving people into an accommodation currently, and that can look like kind of an adjustment to their role. Perhaps we're changing some essential job duties. Sometimes that's reducing hours. And they can be temporary. So they can be temporary or trial accommodations. And someone might need this accommodation right now. And in 6 months, hey, I would really love to be able to be at that level I was at before. I'm feeling great. Perfect. Let's get you back up to where you were. It's evolving. I keep saying the word evolving, but it changes all the time. I had to leave work for 2 years. Prior to working at WeCo, I had an issue with an aneurysm. And had I known more about being able to ask for an accommodation for myself, had my company encouraged me tell me what you need. We really want you here. Instead, I felt like I had to quit. And, coming back into the workplace, being able to focus on people going through some life-changing events, it makes me feel really good to be able to let them know how much we want them on our team, and we're going to do what we can to make this work for you. So.
Great. Matthew, can you share how that accommodation process works for your team?
Well, I can share in generalities, right? So we have a dedicated HR team that works on accommodations, and much like you, we have an engagement process. Someone needing some assistance, they could ask for it themselves, or their hiring manager or people manager can ask as well. HR works then with the individual to find out what their needs are and determine how we will have work rules around that. And then the manager of people is informed by that department as to what the new work conditions will be and how to operate around those. Where my team gets involved is, say, if we don't have something in-house yet, like how can we brainstorm? So we're part of a task force along with HR and other departments and technology and digital accessibility to try to come up with solutions rapidly. Like, what can we do? What do we have available? What do we need to bring in? And trying to find, enterprise systemic solutions. For example, we hypothetically might want to find something to deal with deaf employees as well as deaf customers, right? Try to find one solution instead of two separate ones. So that's how we deal with it. And to your point of things change, we can use a hypothetical example where someone has retinal degeneration. So what they needed as just a larger screen before is starting to get into Zoom technology, or even into more higher end like screen readers. Adjusting those things over time, right? Do we have a ramp? Do we understand and can potentially predict what their needs might be in the future so that we can be working on that now, right? All of those types of things, when you think of a large 78,000 worldwide company, right? It's constant. So trying to figure out the best way to do things. And then even with large scale enterprise software, right? What does the provider bring to the table out of the box, right? How can we leverage those accessibility tools? I mean, just like Zoom, for example, what we're on today. At the start of the pandemic, that didn't have the capabilities that we now see 20 months later, thank goodness, right? And we now have all of these capabilities that we can now start leveraging. So how do we turn those into benefits for our employees, and for all employees, right? Closed captioning isn't just for deaf employees, right? It's for cognitive load employees. It's for people that maybe be multitasking and they're trying to follow along, or someone that just wants that extra confidence to understand what's being said. All those things, can we leverage them as best we can at a large scale?
And I think the theme that I'm seeing here before I get over to Fred is that these companies are seeing it as an opportunity to include, not a hurdle they have to get over, a problem to figure out, which has been our mantra at WeCo with our digital accessibility clients, is to see digital accessibility as the opportunity to include and to get the people involved excited about it. So Fred, anything you want to share about what your accommodation process looks like at Verizon?
Yeah, I think just like Matthew spoke about, a lot of similarities, right? Let's even start with the online application, okay? That is something that my team, we test that regularly throughout the year. Because any large company like a Verizon, we're always making changes, and so you want to ensure that those great changes that you're making to enhance the application experience, that we're not taking away from any of those accessibility features that are out there from a WCAG perspective. So we regularly audit our employment site to ensure that we're not breaking anything, and that hey, is there something new we can add to it as well to provide a better experience? But from there, from the start, we provide accommodations even through the application process. So an individual would like some assistance with filling out their application. We have accommodations for that. We have it for the interview process, prior checklist. So we do provide accommodations throughout the whole life cycle of an individual applying and then hopefully getting hired at Verizon, and then they'll continue to move on. Just like Matthew spoke about, we have a dedicated accommodations team as well. So that's a big help. The systems that an individual would be utilizing to request an accommodation, again, those are audited regularly as well from my team to ensure nothing's breaking, that the experience is what it needs to be, because things do happen, things do change. So let's make sure we're maintaining what we have. And then if there's enhancements that even improve the experience, we should be doing that as well. And that's something that's part of our culture. I would say even a little bit further than that is that I talked about the training for our recruiters and then also our hiring managers as well. So give an example, I just in the process of hiring an individual on my team. I had to re-go through training again. Now I've been with the company for 21 years, been a manager for 20 years, but you know what? It's been more than a year since I hired somebody. So I am required as a manager to go through that training. And it does talk about accommodations. It does talk about unconscious bias. So all those things that you want to reinforce with your managing team, because again, you never know. You may have a manager who doesn't have a person with a disability. Now they're hiring and now they have this great opportunity to bring something on the team that does. You want to reinforce that. So, we're all human. So reinforcement goes a long way. And I think that's something that we see throughout everything at Verizon in terms of training, accommodations, and then just really, it's an investment, right? This isn't a hurdle, as you were talking about with some companies, like as a hurdle. I look at everything as an investment, right? We're going to, whether we're investing in some type of assistive technology to assist with an employee, or we're investing in new technology with our 5G team, right? It's still an investment because you want to bring the best talent in to do the best work possible, because that's going to only benefit your employees and your customers.
And I think one thing that really warms my heart is that between what I'm hearing from Fred and Matthew, the World Health Organization has identified what the major hurdles are to individuals living with disabilities regarding employment. And one of them is systems and policies that do not allow them to be included. And so, having worked for the big machine of state government, which was about 15 years ago, when disability inclusion was allowing one blind person to do clerical work, really, I mean, that's what it was. And and the systems were and policies were never ever looked at. That's a huge sea change in attitude about the fact that these policies need to include everyone and the systems need to work for everyone. So it's wonderful to see that happen.
That's one thing that I say too, is that you can't be inclusive and inaccessible.
Right.
Your foundation has to be set first. If you have programs that you use that are not accessible, then that's where you need to start. If people can't fill out your applications, you're going to need to start there. There has to be some groundwork laid first before you start doing your outreach.
Well, and what we often tell our clients in the digital accessibility side when they come to us and say, this is a third-party vendor software we have to use. It could be like an e-commerce platform, and our hands are tied. And I always say, vote with your feet. There are plenty of e-commerce vendors out there who understand that people living with disabilities are the largest unrecognized minority group in the United States and the world, and they have huge buying power. And if your vendor doesn't understand that, find a vendor who does. So, because you can't do it in theory and not follow up systemically and what your day-to-day work is like. So I'm going to hop back to you, Fred. And maybe you've already answered this, and maybe just reiterate, but what type of work is being done at Verizon to sustain or increase the momentum of what has been started for disability employment in your organization?
Again, I think the way I view what we're doing, right, it really, first off, it starts at the top, right? And that's something to hear about a lot of accessibility programs in general. But I think when people heard that our CEO signed on to the Valuable 500 last year, that really set the tone, not just internally at Verizon, but, our peer companies, competitors, vendor partners, so on and so forth, that really sent a message. And, we also have a chief diversity officer as well, who is very engaged with my team and myself, where we are talking about employment accommodations. It's in her blood, right? And you can feel this, whether it's our CEO, it's our chief diversity officer, it's people on her team. And then, as we leverage our ERG team group, right? There again, a wealth of knowledge there, right? Those are the people that you want to be listening to. Those are the people who are living this every single day. So it's really great to get those insights. So again, I feel like we have a good overall, our arms around it all. But again, there's still so much that still needs to be done because the world is changing. And I think, I always tell people the pandemic, I really felt really spotlighted that need across the world. Because how many, everybody went into a lockdown. And I always give the example, I know people who were in other companies that they were just used to walking down the hall and talking to their HR business partner or their neighbor next to them, asking for help because their equipment or the content they were receiving wasn't accessible. So now everybody's home, and how do you do it? That's a challenge, right? So I think, there are a number of companies out there that this wasn't maybe on their radar, but now it has to be on their radar. Mm-hmm. And now as we go back into the workplace, right, we can't forget about that, right? And I think that's just a general statement for everybody. We just cannot forget how we've operated for the last 20 months and the importance of digital inclusion with accessibility. It's at the core. It's where the world's going. It's where technology is going. So I think, it's interesting to see how a lot of companies had to pivot towards that. And I was, again, very fortunate that I work for a company that really does embrace this and invest in it because it's important, and it's important throughout the organization, which is, I know not every company is like that. And I know there's a lot of people who are hoping their company will. And again, I would just share people that if they're not seeing that in an organization, speak up, right? Your voice matters. And the more people do speak about it, the more people are going to listen to it.
Matthew, sustaining disability at US Bank.
Well, we continue to grow in our team, which is super exciting. We've gone from just 2 people on the team to almost 70.
Nice.
And as a result, right, we see the company continue to work down this avenue, right? So broadening, deepening, getting better over time, and that's really the summation of it, right? The work continues. It's a long road, as we all know.
Debbie, is this is a 90-minute session today? It is. Okay, so we can keep going. So Kelli, I know in our house, disability employment is part and parcel of what we do, but how are we picking up the pace at WeCo?
We talk about disability employment in almost every sentence that comes out of our mouth. We talk about it in our blogs. Lynn's out there doing speaking events, our director of accessibility, now me, we're talking about it all the time, and our employees are seeing us talking about it all the time. It really is just a part of who we are. It's a part of our organization. Disability employment is an everyday part of our life. And a way to keep that going is we've worked really hard to incorporate some of these everyday accommodations just into our normal operations. We offer flexible work schedules. We offer closed captioning for all of our events. We are constantly adjusting people's roles. There's just some things that we just do now that might seem new to some people in an accommodation, but it's just what we do. It's just a normal part of operations, so we try to keep that going. I talked a little bit about, constantly training on accommodation. We train on it annually the same way we do other trainings. It's just really something that is focused on and talked about a lot. And with those conversations happening, Jeff was talking about resourcing your ERGs, leveraging your ERGs. I feel like WeCo is an ERG. And so we're just constantly talking with each other about, what can we do better? What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What can we be doing? And just really try to make disability employment it's just our company. It's just what we do. It's how we operate on a daily basis.
So I'm going to just open this up to everybody on the panel. In what ways did the disability employment work you're doing turn out to be different in reality from the way you had originally planned it? Is there any kind of twist or turn that happened in the process of disability employment?
I think I could probably start a little bit of some back history on me. I grew up with a parent who was diagnosed with MS when I was born. I kind of watched them transition through this change in their disability. I watched them struggling, trying to find employment. I talked earlier about needing to take my own medical break for my own issues that I was having. When I learned I was going to do disability employment at WeCo, I was pumped, and then I was terrified. And I was terrified because I was afraid of saying the wrong thing. What if I ask the wrong question? What if I do something wrong here? And instead of attracting this candidate, I push them away. And so I thought I was really geared for it and ready, and I was just going to be the best at it. And I learned that I had to learn a lot. I took different trainings. I asked questions of my colleagues. I'm very lucky to be able to be able to bounce things off of the people that I work with. There was a lot more resources out there for people in a recruiting position than I realized that there were. And then I really utilized them. So instead of kind of jumping in head first, on fire, ready to change the world, I realized I needed to learn a lot more, even with all the experience that I'd already had. So.
It's funny, Kelly, because, I say every day, like I said, I've been doing this role for over 6 years. I feel like I still learn something new every day. And I feel like I still make a mistake every day in the role. All right. It's a lot of it's trial and error. And, I'm okay with making the mistake as long as it's going to propel us forward in whatever aspect we're working on. Because there really is no true playbook out there of how you should do it, right? And I think that's important for a lot of people to understand. So mistakes are going to happen. What you learn from that mistake is really what matters the most, right? So I'm fortunate where I have a great team behind me where they are empowered to say, Fred, stop, that's wrong. And I go, oh, okay. That's good. Like, now educate me so I can go help and fight the right fight, right? So it's important to have that behind you, because we wouldn't be where we're at if I didn't have a team behind me that really is so passionate, dedicated, and that it's constantly challenging me and making me think differently, which I love, right? It helps me grow. But yeah, it's one of those things where I'll keep saying it, just have a voice, right? ERG teams are the greatest. That's how I look at it. I've had a lot of great conversations, and we've leveraged our ERG team a lot, where we now have an ERG user group for when we're doing testing for both employee tools and customer tools. I love their insights, and I kind of feel like where we finally scratched the surface. And again, I always feel like we're only scratching the surface, no matter what we're doing, because I always want to do everything. Right? That's just my personality. I want to do everything. But you got to learn too, as you're rolling out accommodations and looking at new technology, you can't boil the ocean, because you're not going to get anywhere. So I do love now where I start seeing individuals, whether it's in our sourcing team, it's a business team, where they're looking at a new technology, an HR app, for example, and they're calling me saying, hey, can you look at this? Are they accessible? Do you see any pitfalls if we were to implement this and go and create that contract? That's when you're starting to make some real good headway, where you're not chasing down a team, they're chasing after you as an accessibility team. And like everybody, right? You only have so much bandwidth, but I don't care. If they call me, I'm gonna find a way to make sure we're gonna at least review it, give them insights, and then see how we can kind of dive in deeper to help them out. And that's where I get most proud of where we're evolving as a company, because it's now the reverse. That education awareness has really paid off, because now people are actually reaching out to us. And I don't know, Matthew, if you've seen the same thing with US Bank, because that's
exactly. You all of a sudden see the tide change the direction. And you're like, wait a minute. I used to fight teams on this, and now you're asking me for help. Yay. Right, we're finally there. But for me, to answer Lynn's question, because we'll segue into that, is for us, I really did not expect to be in this particular place at this particular time. I thought it was going to be a lot longer. The exponential growth that we have seen so rapidly is phenomenal. Right? I thought this was a 5-year arc, and we're already gotten there in just 2.5 years. Right? That's huge.
I think some of that is owing to, I'm a geek, so I've researched some of history. We've had some of the greatest advances in human rights in the last 20 years that haven't been seen ever on the face of the earth. It's moving rapidly. And I'm a person of a certain age who's old enough to have seen what it was like in the 80s and 90s in business, where even women were not considered equals. And to now see professionals living with disabilities start to be treated as equals is, as a woman living with a disability that has been through the period of time where I hid my disability at work, I really think that it's just societal advancement of persons living with disabilities has been phenomenal. And I think that COVID has driven that a lot. Any thoughts anybody has on COVID changing the playing field?
I think you're hitting on a different way of saying what you're hitting on. Is it's a perfect storm in a positive way, right?
Yeah.
Society is becoming more woke, for sure, and those things are starting to progress exponentially faster, right? Where things were so long in coming, they're now starting to speed up, and we're starting to see dominoes fall faster and faster, which is a good thing. Technology leaps as well, and then combined with COVID on top of it, right? The fact that we had to make technological changes as a global pandemic is taking place, to be able to continue to work fuels part of that, right? But in your opening remarks, I think we should also think about staffing shortages, right?
Yes.
As companies start to think about what is happening or is about to happen as a result of the baby boomers retiring, that is playing a huge factor into it. And when I was in college, I worked for my university's philanthropy department all through my degree. And one of the things that we were pointing out at the time was the potential pilot shortage.
Mhm.
And it's still looming, right? As all of these pilots that started during the war are starting to age out and retire, there is not enough demand for the amount of flights that we have and the aircraft that we have. Nursing, and on and on and on, right? So as we imagine technology starts to change to accommodate that, make things easier, I mean, do we ever think we would in our lifetime see such thing as a nurse practitioner being able to issue drugs? Right? That is a result of this changing dynamic, the changing capability, the technology that's there, standardization of education, right? Being able to change and start tiering medical advice, urgent care instead of emergency rooms, on and on and on, right? These things are starting to push ever faster. And COVID is just one more piece to the puzzle, right? As we move forward, we have to move forward and we have to move faster. And then things just start to snowball.
They do. They do. And while it wasn't a great vehicle, it did. It did move things up.
Yeah,
So,
Lynn,
it's a
Lynn,
terrible
you're
thing, but
absolutely.
there's an upside to it, right?
absolutely.
I always say, listen, I always look for the good in something that happens, right? And so when you start talking about a pandemic like coronavirus, I think the thing I take away the most is kind of what Matthew was talking about, right? Everybody was in the same boat, right? Everybody was locked home. So digital inclusion was at the forefront. That was pretty much probably the main mechanism for most people to do their job, get their information. For those like myself who have small kids, understand what it's like to have a virtual school environment going on next to me, next to my virtual work environment with 3 dogs barking, my wife doing dishes, and we're all in one house together. So it brought out a lot of things for people to really learn. And I think to the point about technology changing and adapting, where we are 20 months later, to Matthew's point, it's phenomenal, right? And there's a lot more left to do, but it did spotlight the need. So for those that weren't even aware of it, this was the time to really leverage such a terrible event in our history and try to find some good to make sure that going forward, employment opportunities, disability accommodation, so on and so forth, it's in the forefront. And we need to keep, we can't let off the pedal with that, because we have to really continue to remind people, because people will forget, at some point there will be a new normal where this is, people will start transitioning away from what was the pandemic and the environments. We don't want to lose the good that came out of it. And I think that's the most important thing we should, people need to remind people of, because as people go back to normal, they're gonna, it's just human nature, right? If it's not in your face today, you may forget about it. So I think it's everybody's job for that education and awareness to continue.
So
And let's talk about the stigma too, right? This
Mhm.
this to me is a byproduct of all this. The fact that people are now starting to self-disclose tells me that society is also changing to reduce stigma around certain things. The
Right.
ability for people to now say, hey, I need an accommodation, where they would try to muddle through in the physical workspace that we used to have. Is also pushing this, right? Understanding fatigue in a different way, understanding burnout in a different way. If you're reading the current headlines, right, the whole workforce thing that is either erupting or about to erupt, or however we interpret it, is that people are starting to demand a different way of thinking, a different way of working, and it would not have been capable without that intersectionality of all those things happening, right? The speed of technology, the
Yes.
virus, the need for being able to have all these things inside the same household, right? Even the demand on bandwidth. I mean, think about just that simple thing. Back on the start of COVID, we were all dropping calls, and now somehow we have this massive network that can sustain all these videos and everything in a way that wasn't possible before. Right?
Well,
It's all
and
going the
Matthew,
right way.
I think even when you talk about the advancements, and you're talking a little bit about even health, right, in the medical field, right, in technology. I mean, telemedicine was not commonly used prior to the pandemic, right? And so as we're looking at workforce environments, virtual environment that everybody is working in, that everybody was forced into, it's great to start seeing where even for mental health, having that a counselor on the other end of a video call, right? I think there's a lot of people that never would even thought about that, right? But then they were like, they knew they needed assistance, whether it's through an AP program or just in general. And to be able to leverage the technology that was out there. And we've already seen enhancements in that technology with the telemedicine where we were 20 months ago. Again,
which I hope stays, right? Don't you?
Well,
I mean, you don't feel well. Why do you want to go to the doctor's office? I could just call in. We can have a conversation.
Right.
I love it, and saves time for the employer.
Yes.
But part of I think the struggle with the woke culture for those of us who professionals living with disabilities is that suddenly all of these jobs that we were told we couldn't do because we couldn't come into the office physically are okay for someone who is able-bodied to do remotely from home. And that is kind of the double-edged sword of this, is that we're looking for this disability inclusion, employment inclusion moment to come out of this, and we're just not seeing it happen. We're still seeing unemployment and underemployment in the United States at about 80% of professionals living with disabilities, because we can't quite get over the fact that living with a disability doesn't mean you are totally incapable of working. And I think that's really, really a challenge point that we're at. We need to save some time for questions, and I want to get to a few lightning round questions for you because we've got some good ones. If you encountered, we'll start with Kelli. If you encountered an employer who said it was too expensive or problematic to consider candidates with disabilities, how would you respond to them?
I would educate them. I would let them know there's a 2020 survey that JAN, those of you who don't know about JAN, it's the Job Accommodation Network. They're on my speed dial. They did a report. 56% of workplace accommodations for employees cost absolutely nothing. It doesn't cost anything for these accommodations that some of these companies are, afraid to have to tackle. We talk about accommodations, and then we use the word ingenuity a lot. People living with disabilities are constantly having to be their own engineers, to be innovative, and accommodations are that same way. And then the report also stated that, out of that 56%, the remaining could cost around $500. So again, these accommodations are going to focus mostly on ingenuity, mostly on conversations between you, your company and your employees, resourcing your ERGs, talking to people, what is it that you need? And then finding that common ground of what's reasonable for your company to be able to accommodate. I would also tell them that if you're not looking for people with disabilities in your talent pool, you're missing out on a huge amount of people. There are 386 million people worldwide who are within working age who are living with one or more disability. So it's 386 million people that you're missing out on if your outreach program isn't accessible, if you're not focusing on being inclusive. And then I just also would tell them that you really need to look at disability as a skill set. I talk about innovation, problem solvers, highly motivated groups of people, and the most loyal employees. I am just talking about WeCo. I'm sure that's within everyone else too. But you know, just the best talent should not be overlooked out of fear or out of not being fully educated on disability employment.
Matthew, what would you say to someone who thought disability employment was too expensive or problematic?
I just start laughing. I really do.
Good answer.
I mean, to all the things that Kelli said is the common approach. But I also try to say to them, like, really in this day and age, how can you afford not to? Right? We're the great resignation, you know, talent is hard to find, talent is hard to keep, right? How can you afford not to even consider a huge pool of talent? That's crazy. And, you know, as Kelly's saying, right, citing statistics, talking about things, and getting them to dialogue. Tell me what your preconceived notions are. And what I find is that if we either use a fishbone exercise or something similar, what we find out is that there's really nothing behind the statement. It is literally just a statement that someone is making sometimes. And also tailoring the conversation. Like, so for example, hypothetically saying that someone says, blind people can't drive. Well, that's funny because according to this group and that group, there are 37% of US drivers are blind. So where are you getting your statistics, right? So, you know, challenging people on what their preconceived notions are, and advocating for them and getting to the root cause and saying, well, that's actually not quite true. Right? And challenging it along the way. And what you find is they run out of excuses. You know, either there is no money cost associated to it. It's just being clever and trying to have a conversation with someone saying, what do you need? But you also find that, or my personal, I'm not representing my company, but my personal answer often is like, you find that the people that say those things are often the type of people that you look at them when they're in a restaurant and you're like, should you really be out in public? Because these are really bad things, right? These are societal non-norms. You want to try to accommodate guests. Why wouldn't we want to try to accommodate our employees? Right? Why aren't we treating our employees the same as we would our own customers?
And I think it is that paradigm shift that we're living through. A good example is that I was on a women in tech panel shortly before the close down for COVID. And I'm probably one of the few women in the Twin Cities that is over the age of 50 and in digital. I mean, there just aren't a lot of us. So as a room full of very young women, and just to explain to them what it was like when I was their age in business, trying to come out about my disability because, which is very taboo, mental illness, because of a medication change. And that it was accepted that because my employer found out about that, I was fair game for a middle manager to take shots at me, who said something to me like, you're not going to go postal on us, are you? And that stuff was tolerated, but we're not there anymore. And I think you've got a point there, Matthew, in that not everybody realizes we're not there anymore. You know, that's not okay. I know we're trying to wrap up a few questions. I just wanted one more that I was going to get out before we open it up to the audience. And that is really, Fred and Matt, to you. Do you see digital accessibility as the breakthrough industry point for disability employment? Because lo and behold, and it could be just who I happen to know because I work in digital accessibility, but we've got everyone on this panel their company works towards or in digital accessibility. Do you think digital accessibility is going to revolutionize disability employment?
I'm going to say yes, but I'm gonna be a little cautious with that. I think it is, and the reason why I say that is we see everything changing so fast. And today it is digital. And that's where we see everything going. So I'm going to say it is truly opening the door for that revolution to happen. I'm fortunate enough where I work with both the digital side as well as the physical side as well. So I'm harnessing all this positive energy, all this visibility all the time to really blow that door open across digital and physical, right? All aspects of accessibility. And I feel like there are things that are being developed today that maybe we haven't seen yet. And I think that's going to be that next step. We're going to say, yes, like today, this is great. But once you kind of get into that whole AR, VR world, I think there's so many possibilities for a digital revolution for accessibility that we haven't scratched the surface of yet. So yes, my answer would be, Lynn, absolutely. But I really think it's the stepping stones of what's going to really come out. And I think if we're having this conversation in 5 years, I think all of us on this panel are going to be like, can you imagine what we were talking about 5 years ago? Just like we were talking about even telemedicine and other technology advancements for the last 20 months. Because I think a lot of us are like, wow, we've come so far. So I'm just optimistic. So yes, I think the right answer is say yes, but I'm so optimistic. I think there's so much more that we don't even realize is coming.
I think if we change the word digital to technology and we add in education, I think we're really there, right? Because it really is starting to be a technology game, whether it is advances in medical science, in prenatal care, robotics. I mean, I was just watching a video on LinkedIn of some guy who's just a dad who's in robotics, has a paraplegic son, and he built him a exoskeleton himself, right? Or you see families can't afford a wheelchair, and the local high school robot team is building them a wheelchair. This technology, right? Technology itself is going to push it, whether it's digital or some other aspect technology, and then educating ourselves as we learn. What we learn about the body now is nowhere what we thought before. I mean, even as simple as you used to be issued crutches after knee surgery, and now you get a little cart with 4 wheels. You know, that type of change is possible with advances in technology and better understandings of the world around us, and then educating others, which then invent new solutions based on that information, right? They feed each other.
Excellent. Debbie, do we have any questions? We should really launch into those.
There are no questions in the chat yet, but we can open it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone, please feel free to just speak up, announce your name, ask your question. You can direct it towards one person or to the whole panel. Okay. Anthony, you are unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I'm in New York State, so it's exciting what you guys are doing over in Minnesota. You know, we think like we're all that in New York State sometimes, but we're really not all the time, because there's a lot of progressive stuff that's happening all over. There's an organization here called Center State CEO, and there's a lot of movement in Central New York State near Syracuse with just integrating or making networks for employees who are employers who are looking for employees. So now we have the staff shortage. So I'm about to have some conversations with some people at this place. And I want to talk about the whole disability issue and bring it up in terms of what you guys are talking about, how this really is an untapped employee market. And what they're, because my latest thing that when I talk about inclusion, I tell people it's not just about inclusion, it's about what people can contribute that we're missing. And that whole, you know, and I work in the mental health field, so it's encouraging to know your issue is, you know, mental health, because a lot of times those are the hardest to talk about. I'm anxious when X, Y, Z. This is difficult for me with X, Y, Z. Like I don't necessarily have Asperger's, but I have Asperger's ways. And I'm in my 60s, and I finally found my niche in the work world, and it's been really, really hard because, oh, we know you're really smart, blah, 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 blah. But then you don't know the hidden rules, and then you don't get it, and you're always second place. And it's cost me decades. So I have an understanding of, you know, how it must be so frustrating for people who have so much to offer. So I guess my question would be ways of just selling the fact that I think that business and industry should be driving this. I want to see a shift from us going to them and saying, can you hire people with disabilities? Part of my job is support and employment exec rehab. I want to see a shift from that to employers seeking out people with disabilities. How do I sell that to area businesses and stuff? That makes sense?
So you're wondering how businesses could sell themselves in the
yes, it's part of it, and selling it to them that they need to really take a greater role in this. That this is something that they should be driving. We shouldn't always be coming to them asking, saying, okay, I have this person with a disability, can we talk about accommodations? But they can actually, it will benefit them to take the driver's seat in this because there's all these untapped talent.
And Anthony, you may want to turn your volume down. It's really reverberating through your speaker.
Okay, hold on. I have dogs barking a little bit.
I think, you know, there's a lot of resources out there for companies that are aware that they need to start on this, you know, inclusion or accessibility journey. We all were talking about one earlier called Disability In. Many of the companies are DEIs already. I think.
What's that called again? Disability
In.
DEI.
And then for smaller companies, there's the National Organization on Disability. There are government entities like EARN and PEAT and JAN. There's so many things out there, resources for companies to really be able to see where they're at and learn where they can improve. You know, kind of like taking a snapshot of here we are today, this is where we want to be, how do we get there? And then teaming up with some of these organizations to assist. You know, it's a lot of education and a lot of conversation about what people living with disabilities can bring to a team, different perspectives that they can have.
You guys.
Anthony, could you please mute yourself? Because we're just getting so much feedback. I would say that, you know, I was actually started out my career as a salesperson, that, you know, first of all, what I would say to job seekers, just like we say to our clients who have inaccessible aspects of their website from third-party vendors, is vote with your feet. Look at the Disability and Employment Index employers. National Organization on Disability also has a leading disability employer designation that WeCo has. And look on those lists, and that's where you shop for jobs. And there are more and more employers that already have it, that idea. Now, if you're trying to do that locally and trying to push that locally regarding the employers you have, I would just parade around that list and sell the aspects of why companies want to be a part of that. You know, it's return on investment, you know, for most businesses, if you can make that business case. Matt or Fred, anything to add on that?
I just want to make sure I was hearing the question properly. So I think what I'm hearing being asked is, you know, the other side of the coin. He wants to hire people and is looking for ways to get talent presented to him. Is that correct?
Oh, he's muted. I'm sorry. Maybe we could swing back to that. Are there any other questions out there, Debbie, that have been chatted in? Or
Well, let me just
No.
answer it as if that were the case, right? So,
okay,
so you're right. If you're trying to attract talent, right? You've got a job board and you're trying to get people to apply at your position, but you're not getting people with disabilities that you need. Partner with other people, right? So every state has a Federation of the Blind. You can work with them. They have their own job boards that you can post your positions onto. They're normally happy to do so. Partnering with other organizations like Federation of the Blind for different disabilities that are in your area. There are job boards dedicated to, you know, disabled employees looking for work that you can post or cross-post your positions into. So just work with your recruiters within your own company to ensure you're posting your jobs over there for visibility. In case that was the question you're asking, you know, just start feeding your stuff out into their visibility, because that's where they're looking. They're not necessarily looking to go to your website to find a job, because traditionally they haven't been able to, right? So put your position in front of them where they would see it.
And Matthew, I think I would also, oh, go ahead, Kelly.
I was just to piggyback off that really quickly, you know, that is something that we do. We seek out, we use LinkedIn a lot, and we have joined numerous disability employment groups. We have our own disability employment connection group called DEC. So your company might have to put in that work to find those candidates and look at places that aren't maybe Indeed, maybe aren't Monster, which are still great job boards, but start looking specifically for that group of people that you're trying to hire.
Yeah, and I was an ad. I know others have done this as well, because there are so many different forums out there, and people have anxiety about, am I picking the right forum? Am I asking the right question in the right forum? You know, from a local perspective, right? So for Anthony, he's talking about New York, and I'm assuming a segment within a New York, smaller New York population, not necessarily New York City, let's just say somewhere out in the suburbs of New York. You know, you also can reach out to your local congressman and say, hey, so I'm looking for, and see if they have advice in terms of different disability boards that they are working with, at least to make the networking connection. They're not going to have the answer for you per se, but hopefully they can point you in the right direction. So if you are looking for a reputable organization in your local area, that's one way you could also look as well.
well, I think that we're at a point to wrap up. So if there are, and as a quick conclusion, if there are any resources for job seekers or employers that any of our panelists would like to offer in the last few moments. I did put Job Access Network or Jan out there, which I know Kelly has on her speed dial.
I do. You know, there's, and I cannot remember the acronyms right now, but EARN, EARN, and PEAT, PEAT. I believe those are either .orgs or .govs. I would really, you know, I look for .orgs or .govs a lot when I'm trying to find different types of resources. We talked about disability in NOD, the National Organization on Disability. And, just a little plug here, WeCo Accessibility Services is absolutely a resource that your company can utilize for consulting on, starting that journey with accommodations or inclusive employment. We're here for you too.
Great. All right. So thank you so much to our panel. This was actually so much of a bigger discussion than I had anticipated. And it's just was a right synergy that we had with all three of you. Thank you, Matthew, Fred, Kelly. And I'd just like to let everyone know that we always have these discussions post-production verbatim captioned. And so it takes us a little while to get those out to you, but we will have it up on our website within 2 to 3 weeks at the WeCo, THEWECO.com under free webinar learning. And it's also under our free resource, our resource tab. If you have any immediate questions that we might be able to help you with, we are a mission-based for-profit. We're happy to field your questions at accessinfo, ACCESSINFO at theweco.com. And our phone number is 855-849-5050, extension 1. Thank you everyone for joining in the discussion day, and have a happy National Disability Employment Awareness Month.